This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
I'm in the seaside village of Folkestone, just north of Dover on the English coast. It's the narrowest point of the English Channel. As a matter of fact, I can see the coast of France just off to my left there because today's a clear day, about 20 miles distant. And that makes Folkestone the focal point for the migrants who are trying to get across from France into England by stealing fishing boats or getting in little rubber dinghies and trying to paddle their way across the English Channel. That's causing some problems because they're capturing up to 100 people a day sometimes right here, and that's very costly for the British Coast Guard and the British Border Service. So the new British government under Boris Johnson is trying to do something to deter these migrants before they even start that perilous journey across the English Channel. Folkestone is such a strategic place in World War I and World War II history. In World War I, more than 1 million troops left from this spot to march down to the seaside and go over to fight in the war. And many of those guys never came back. So the fence off to my left here is just covered with red knit flowers to commemorate those who lost their lives. But that's not all that happened here in Folkestone. There were over 100,000 Canadian troops that came and were stationed here during the war. There were more than 100,000 Belgian refugees that came across from Europe and took up refuge here once their country got bombed. And there were also millions and millions of men and women who came through from the Allied forces, the U.S. and elsewhere, during World War I and World War II. And this place here in Folkestone really took the brunt of bombing and shelling from the Germans in World War I and World War II, and much of this town was destroyed. I think one of my absolute favorite things to do whenever I come to Europe is to go visit old churches. Partially because we don't have things that old in the United States by and large, but because they're just so beautiful. I love just to walk through these old churches and just imagine the people who gave of themselves to build those churches for the glory of God. That was the way that they expressed their devotion to God at that time. And it's really unfortunate that so many of these churches are really more like museums now. Their congregations are dwindling down to nothing. They're having to close many of them. I've seen quite a few that have been turned into nightclubs and private homes and all sorts of things because they just don't have the congregation anymore. Part of that is because the population is aging, but a lot of it is just simply because people are entertained to death. You know, people just are so caught up in Netflix and smartphones that they don't think about being involved in community anymore. I think there's a good warning in that for us in the United States. That church is important, community is important. It is the fabric that holds our country together. It is the first resort for people in need, at least it should be. Whenever we let the government intrude on the domain of the church, we give something up that shouldn't be given up, because the government trying to do charity just means that the government, A, does it much worse than churches do, and B, there's always strings attached when the government tries to do charity. They're always trying to buy your vote by what they can give you. And it doesn't engender gratitude when you get a check from the government. If anything, it could engender resentment because, well, the government can print money. If they gave me $600, why didn't they give me more? They could have given me more. And it's a big impersonal entity as opposed to a church, which is a body of people in a local community that know you, that hold you accountable, and and encourage you, and at least that's the way it ought to be. And unfortunately, these days, more and more in the United States, and even more over here in Europe, church is just a relic. It's a thing of the past. This church behind me is the Holy Trinity Church, the Church of England, here in Folkestone, England, right on the coast. And I was just talking to the lady inside, Wendy, and she's telling me that they have to really struggle to try to keep this church open. They have to rent it out for concerts, and they have to sell jelly and books and things like that. All sorts of events they have to host in there just to try to keep the lights on. And that's really unfortunate. So I'd encourage you, go to church on Sunday, get to be a part of a body of believers. Don't ever let yourself get too busy or too lazy to be a part of your local community like that. Those parallel structures to government are absolutely vital to the health and vitality of any culture. And if they go away, we're all the poorer for it. This tower behind me is all that's left of what was Christ Church, Folkestone. It was built in 1850, and it was bombed in 1942. So they just made a memorial out of it. There's various headstones and things around this little park and where the church used to be that are memorializing those who died in Normandy, the Gurkhas, different people like that. And yesterday, I got to go visit the Gurkha military base, which is right here in Folkestone. This is the Royal Gurkha Rifles. This is the absolutely famous British military unit made up of soldiers from Nepal. They're fearsome warriors. They're very, very loyal, and absolutely amazing tradition and history behind them. It was really an honor to get to go meet those guys and see their storied history and relics and things like that. It was really cool. I'm at London Heathrow this morning, and this place is a ghost town. I mean, empty. Usually this is practically standing room only in here the last few times I've been here, and it is absolutely empty. My plane has so many seats open that they could probably put everybody on the plane in business class if they wanted to, but of course they won't do that. But these airlines have got to be losing tons of money on these flights because they're just not filling the seats. So this is going to have a far-reaching economic impact, without a doubt. And it will be interesting to see if this ends up being, much ado about nothing, or if it turns out to be something that really does cripple the world economy. They just announced the first COVID-19 case in Panama. And so I'm sure that's got everyone there up in arms. What concerns me is that person came from Europe, and I'm afraid Panama might shut down flights from Europe and not allow me back in. So here's hoping that I can get home.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.